we have copies of the minutes. And are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? If none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move that the minutes be approved as circulated.
Second.
Okay, all right. And now, looks like we move into the 2025 external audit contract presented by Mason.
And give me just a minute, I will see if I can share. So it feels like we just completed our fiscal 24 audit and the fiscal 25 audit is upon us. Before I go too deep into these slides, thank you for the reminder. Last year during the fiscal 24 audit session, we also talked about a 10-year audit of our transportation program. That was kind of completed off cycle to the regular audit. Our external financial audit and single audits had to be completed as a part of that. That audit was kind of an extension, a separate single audit of the transportation separately because it is such a large fund. We were supportive in that discussion, but mostly hands-off. I think the financials element was only a small part of it. A lot of that was programmatic discussion. I had kind of forgot about that piece, but that audit was officially closed about a month and a half ago. Administrative closure. I'm working with our director. I owe her some information that will also go through our county manager. That is generally kind of a memo and awareness to the board, but the standard practice there is that there are no special presentations unless there are findings, and there were no findings with that audit of the transportation program. But that was not necessarily on my list, so if y'all have any specific questions or anything you want to hear about that today. I will say the folks who run our transportation shop are highly conscientious and very thoughtful, and so we expected nothing less of how this went. Yeah.
Thanks for including that in the minutes.
Yeah, I do have a question. I'm unfamiliar with the funding. So is this going to need to be done in another 10 years? Is the funding stream the same or?
Yes, it is a mixture of funding streams. So the big part is federal is what's activating that, but it is a mix of federal, state, and local matching dollars. The requirement for the 10-year audit, I think, was activated in 2018, and it was on a staggered implementation. So this, I believe, is actually our first 10-year audit. And yes, unless something changes, we expect it to happen in another 10 years.
See if our Outlook calendars go that far, just
Right.
let's remind us.
I know I can't book a conference room that far, so
Yeah.
we'll catch up. Any other questions there? All right, so let's start talking fiscal 20 year. So I will kind of start with an overview. Since some of this room is new, I think, to discussion potentially, or just a reminder of some things. So just a basic overview of our existing auditor relationship. Malden & Jenkins is our current auditor. They call themselves, we recognize them as a large regional firm, so they operate primarily in the Southeast. The folks that support our audit are based out of Columbia and Raleigh primarily. We also have an audit manager that sits down in Florida, but our audit partner comes out of the Columbia office and he runs the Carolinas office of their local government practice. They do have a specialty in local government auditing, financial accounting, so I think a third of the entire Malden & Jenkins practice is committed to local government work. So we really appreciated that. We went through a competitive selection process in fiscal year 23. That was our first year with them. I will say since then, they have shown up and been everything that they present themselves to be through that selection process. We had 4 respondents. We felt like any of them could have done the job well. There were just some pieces that spoke with Malden & Jenkins. The commitment of their firm, a third of their firm, to doing this work. They have a lot of connections with compliance legs, governmental accounting standards boards. They have direct relationships there. They have a lot of experience and background in single audit, so the programmatic federal funding pieces. And they have proven themselves during the audit and throughout the audit. We've already started some questions and conversations with them about addressing Helene type activities that we'll have to account for in a special way. This is one of the bigger grant type projects that we'll have dealt with maybe ever. And so they're already playing a support role there. We've been in the room with them for many of the ongoing conversations around cash flow and some of the other funding sources that are coming. Our current agreement structure with them is we set up an additional 3-year term. So we're walking into the 3rd year audit now for fiscal 25. We indicated to them when we selected them that there would be an option to extend for 2 years. We can talk about that later today. They gave us pricing for the initial 3 years when they proposed to us. So we knew what the number was, and that number included 5 major programs. So on the single audit programmatic review side, we get 5 major programs every year. You all may recall that that number has gone up the last couple of years so far. Those things are triggered by thresholds, outside requirements, federal and state requirements, and so there's nothing really we can do about it. But we do have some proposals and recommendations to talk about today about how we can set ourselves up for success there. Again, the scope is they are external financial auditors, but that includes the single audit for us, which could technically be separate, but we include that as a part of our comprehensive financial reporting and accounting program. So you have this in front of you, but just a reminder of the history. So that second column from the left, base cost, is what was proposed to us during the competitive selection process. That has been what's gone into our standard contracts to the state every year. That sort of middle column, final cost, is what we have ended up paying in final, and then those final notes show how we got there. So there were some triggers where based on high risk or crossing of dollar thresholds that we might not know until we got to the end of the availability window. We're getting to the end of September, and we're seeing final spend come in above thresholds. Then they have to review additional programs. Some determination about those things can change very close to the end of the formal audit cycle. So an additional program in 23, 3 additional programs in 24, which was pretty big for us. When we started this and kind of did the math, 5 major programs as a base made a lot of sense to us. That was the level of activity that we've done in the past, but there seems to be a lot more federal activity in the way of funds flowing through the county, but also how programs are defined as high risk and requiring special review outside of potentially even dollar thresholds. So we've seen a lot more activity there. And so we'll talk about it in a minute, but for 2025, for the current audit, it was kind of on my mind anyway. We were thinking about budgeting some extra funds to kind of ease up on the administrative process. And then we had a matching proposal that came from our auditor's side without us even having discussed it. And that's what we'll talk about today. But the base price they gave us a few years ago was just under $200,000 for this year. The number that we're going to talk about in a minute, though, is potentially as high as $226,000, which would be the not to exceed amount if they reviewed a total of 8 programs for us. So if we got on this year and only had to review 5 major programs, we would stay under the $200,000 mark. 26 and 27, of course, are placeholders. I think there's space for negotiation if you all determine to extend contract. So these are the 2 options in front of you. Option 1 is basically what I'm calling a base agreement. Proceed as we always have. Use the number that they gave to us in the initial proposal. It does include 5 major single audit programs. I have an asterisk next to the state submittal date. This is progress for us. The state has kind of recognized that it's really difficult for us to hit what's technically an October 31st deadline every year. And they have extended, no matter what we do, the official due date now to the end of the calendar year. So that gives us room to breathe. I think we would still plan to work towards a November 30th submittal date as we have in the past. But again, this gives us some space kind of in the administrative requirements. If we go with the base agreement, if there are any changes to our proposed timeline or the cost, the number of programs reviewed, we would have to come back to this group and the Board of Commissioners to approve a contract amendment if there were any changes there. Option 2 is what I call extended. Again, 226,000 would be the potential not to exceed amount. Realistically, I do not see us needing audit of more than 8 programs, but I guess that's an option that's always out there. This is not to exceed, so we would pay somewhere between the 199,000 and 226,000, depending on the programs. There would be very specific numbers. Again, we would look towards December 31st as the ultimate deadline. This minimizes the likelihood that we would need to come back to you all for contract amendments. It really is low risk in the way that we wouldn't spend the money if the programs weren't reviewed. An additional benefit here is that we do kind of secure pricing for any additional programs above the base contract. So when we've had discussions with Mullen and Jenkins in the past and gone over the 5 programs, we've kind of negotiated on a program by program basis. The numbers they've given us have generally been between $9,000 and $15,000 additional program depending on the level of effort. This 226 would lock us into the bottom of that, so about $9,000 per program for the next 3. So I think there's a benefit there for us. So do we need to talk about these anymore while they're on the slide? I think there are a couple more notes in the back, but those are, I'd say, minor considerations. So is there any conversation you want to have while we're here on this slide? And I'll ask for action in a couple of minutes.
No, it seems to me that they've done a good job and that they, I know we've had discussions in the past about timeframes and timeliness and things like that, and that doesn't seem to appear to have occurred
Right.
with this group. And I think if you know in advance that you're prepared and programs are gonna reach trigger level, then why wouldn't you be proactive and do it that way? So it seems to me like a wise way to plan for the audit. So that's at least my perspective from what you shared.
I agree. Where there have been delays in the first couple of years, they were outside of our control. And I think we've taken measures to address. We've changed our actuarial firm, and then Pauline obviously got here kind of right in the middle of us passing the bulk draft to them for review. But yeah, they've been great. Actually served as a reference for them the other day to another entity. So I believe in their business.
Can you help remind me what, in the ballpark, what was the total programs that were in the prior year?
So when you say total programs, total major programs that were audited or total programs across?
That's the number of programs that were included on your CFA.
Oh, wait, total?
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't tell you at the top of my head, we've got a
15 or 20.
way more than
So, yeah.
multiple pages.
Yeah. I remember going through it. I was trying to get a ballpark. That's 5 out of.
Well, yeah, and I guess 8 really out of all that. We've got a lot of big programs, like Mason said, a lot of the 5 that we have get taken up by just programs that have come up on a rotation or considered high risk. So if we have any other grants that are high dollar, it kind of throws us already into those extra program costs. And obviously with FEMA coming, we're gonna have another major program next year if we were having any drop off this year. So it does make sense to be conservative as far as expecting sort of the same level of volume.
And going up, yes. Based on the prices, it seems like they are doing a good job of absorbing a lot of the risk that come along with that hurricane.
So additional considerations you'll see in your packet, I mentioned extension of the deadline, so I think this is good news for us. We obviously would plan to come in early now as opposed to technically late. And I don't know that today is the day for this discussion, but throughout this year, I think we're going to continue the conversation about whether or not you think it's worth extending the contract with Mullen and Jenkins beyond the initial 3-year term. So if there's no further discussion, I would ask you to select one of the options, direct us to move forward, and then I would plan to bring whatever option this is to the Board of Commissioners, not today, but at their next regularly scheduled.
Anyone choose to make a motion?
Did you have a recommendation? Of your thoughts?
Option 2.
Certainly, yes, I would recommend option 2. I think.
Then I make a motion that we present to the commissioners to extend the agreement and continue our relationship with the current audit company.
And option 2.
Yes, sir.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, aye. Any opposed? Okay, ayes have it.
Before we move to the next item, I'm Melissa Moore, I'm the finance officer for the county. And I just want to commend Mason and Glenn for their integrity and their brilliance at trying to post a lien. Everyone else is just kind of running in a million different directions, and for them to regain their focus and direct their team to bring this audit to a close. And I'm so proud of them.
Thank you. Mostly this guy.
We had help from the rest of the team too. The fact that we have some people more dedicated to FEMA reimbursement was a huge weight off of our shoulders to get this done, because if they weren't here, I would probably still be working on it.
And again, Malden and Jenkins has been an awesome partner. We have really appreciated working with their stuff.
Great.
Thank you all so
Great.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
I believe I'm the next item on the agenda as well. This one is much more brief. I know this is an item that you all have been waiting on, and I really just wanted to put it back. I don't have a formal presentation. The cash and payments handling policy is something that's been on our list for quite a while, and we've been working on it in the background. We actually have a draft document in place that I think is a good example of what a policy could be. The policy itself is just a few pages. But what we do have are some very extensive procedures that we're working to finalize, and that reflects the high-risk nature of cash, but also the specific needs of effectively 30-something businesses that operate as departments across the organization. So we're trying to finalize those pieces. When I put it back on your list, when we come back in July or whenever the next meeting is set, we hope to give you some more detailed thoughts and notes to walk through on that policy. But wanted to let you know, we have not forgotten it. We are working on it. We're gonna move it forward to the next discussion.
And I've seen a draft of the procedures and the policy, and I think they're very, very solid. I think the team worked really hard on that. I think when they present them, people will be happy with them.
Seems to be a challenge because cash handling procedures and things keep changing, banks and, yeah, it's a moving target, but thank you, gentlemen.
It is, and like Mason was saying, I think the biggest challenge is that, we effectively have 30 different individual businesses, right? A tax collection of Parks and Rec is not going to look the same as it is in the tax collector's office, right? And so I think it's difficult to set a baseline that is strict enough for the departments that really need to have strict cash handling, like the tax assessor, while being flexible enough to be able to run out of a shack in Parks and Rec, right? If that sort of makes sense. So it's difficult, but I think they did a pretty good job of hitting that middle ground.
For sure. So really looking forward to bringing that back and closing up.
Being finished, right?
So we're looking forward to it too. Okay, I guess we'll move on to the internal audit update.
Okay, fantastic. And I've got hard copies of the slides if anybody wants a hard copy as well.
What you asked me?
Okay, so obviously Rob Hartman, Internal Audit Director here for the county. Wanted to give you an update on where internal audit has been at, what I've been up to since our meeting in January. What I will say is that a lot of my focus over the last few months has not really been so much on actually performing internal audits, but it's been a lot of sort of the administrative stuff of keeping a department afloat as necessary, right? So working on budget presentations and, software and things of that nature. So I'm gonna hit on some of those highlights for you in this presentation. The actual shortest part of the presentation will be about the audit that I'm currently working on, which is our P-card audit. So speaking of the P-card audit, I finished planning. I've kind of gotten what I want to kind of focus in on, and I'm working on field work now. I've been working with the procurement manager, Ron is his name. He's fantastic, and he's been super receptive, answered all my questions. I've been right around the corner from his office, so I regularly just walk over there to ask him more questions as I have them, but it's been fantastic. And so I think there will probably, I'm sure we'll have some audit findings, but I don't predict anything will be too crazy, depending on what I'm seeing. At least as of right now, I don't see anything that looks too particularly concerning. That could change obviously as I dig more, but as of right now, there's nothing that I feel like I need to bring to your attention right away in the middle of this project. So like I said, that's the shortest part of the update, just because it's been mostly focusing on other things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our software. I mentioned this at our last presentation. Diligent is the software that we use right now. And kind of one of the concerns that, if you all remember, Matt Baker had when he was the interim director was the high cost of Diligent, right? Diligent, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I believe we were paying close to $80,000 a year for it. That's a crazy, crazy amount for an audit software. My prior place that I worked at, we had way more users, and that's typically how these softwares are priced, and they were paying close to $10,000. Now that's some historic pricing. They've been on that software for 20 years, and so that helps a little bit. But I mean, we were just way overpaying. So the first thing I wanted to do before I explored any other softwares was get with Diligent and really, really, really hammer out the specifics of this contract and see if we can do a little bit better on the pricing. So there's some services that we had in the contract that realistically we were never going to use. There's the ability to, from the software, send an email that would then, for example, go to Melissa if I'm requesting something from her, and then she would click on the link and upload something. That's just not the culture that we have here at Buncombe County. Our IT department really, really doesn't want people clicking on links in emails, and they train people not to do that, right? And that's good. I'm glad for that, for what it's worth. And so I took that out of the contract. Originally, they had 5 users on the contract. I'm not sure why we ever had 5 users. We only ever had a 3-person shop. So we cut that down to 3 users. And with all that said and done, the contract is going to be $60,000 for this year, and then going forward, $50,000 a year. So we were able to save a considerable chunk of change there. But that's still not good enough for me. That's still really high for the software that we're using. So I'm also doing some other demos for other audit softwares. I've met with Audit Board, I've met with Teammate. I'm planning on meeting with Auto Audit at some point in the future. So I'm working on this so that way when we go into next year's budget cycle, I can hopefully bring forth a better product that's going to be hopefully a lot cheaper. I have some issues with Diligent. I don't think it's the greatest audit software, and so if I don't like it and we're paying a lot of money for it, I think it makes sense to find something that's cheaper. Based on some of the discussions I've had with some of our vendors, including the upstart costs for some of these, it'll actually save us money in the first year of implementation, and the first year is always the most costly because you have to pay all the implementation costs.
Will we have any trouble getting them out of it?
So the contract's a year-to-year basis.
Oh,
so
okay.
Based on our cycle, I don't think it'll be an issue. Yeah. So I'm working on that stuff now. That's taking up a lot of my time, me scheduling these meetings and talking to these people, and all the salespeople want to talk for like 2 hours to you, of course. And so I'm doing a lot of that, but it's really important work, and I think it'll help the audit shop moving forward. So I'm working on that a lot. We're also working on some updates to our Navex
I
software.
have a quick question.
Yes,
before we move
absolutely.
forward. First
Yes.
of all, thank you for looking at ways to save money. We really appreciate that. The
Yeah.
second is if and when you should switch from Diligent to one of these others, knowing that you have a small shop,
Yeah.
what will that will that mean a higher level of workload during that transition to onboard it, to do the training? Just
Yeah,
thinking
so-
through that lens.
Yes, no, absolutely. A lot. So what I will say is a lot of softwares, when I've been talking to them, we've been talking about sort of the timeline, and a lot of them are willing to sort of, the way that the analogy that they've used is sort of if you're moving from one house to another, you try to keep both at the same time so you can move everything from one house to the other instead of pulling it out, putting it in storage. And so a lot of them we've talked about sort of the timeline and making sure that we have both software so we can pull everything out of Diligent and put it in the new software. There might be some upstart on the training piece of it, but what I will say is good audit softwares don't really need a lot of training. Diligent needs a lot of training because it's not a very good software. But like Auto Audit, Teammate, even Audit Board really don't need a lot of training. At least from what I've seen in the demos and that sort of thing. Yes, they're much more user-friendly. And a lot of them also come built in with an analytics tool, which is something that Diligent doesn't have. The closest thing the county offers to that is Power BI. Power BI is a fantastic tool, but I'm used to having Idea at my disposal, which is a really, really powerful analytics tool, but it's expensive, right? And so I can't really justify bringing forth buying Idea to you all when we're already spending so much on Diligent. But if we can move to another software that's cheaper and has an analytics package, I see that as like a win all around. I also don't anticipate that when we go through the budget process, it will be denied, especially if we're saving a lot of money, right? So,
They're looking, to save money.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they need money.
Yes.
We need
So-
all the help we
We
can.
all will,
Right, yeah, that'll help pay for the extra programs.
the extra part of the audit.
Well, all that budget, so the way that our process works, and I know this is, you all probably know this, but for the rest of our committee, the way our process works is the initial price gets budgeted in your budget, and then from there it moves over to IT's budget. IT basically pays the maintenance costs. So that $30,000 that I'm saving, Next year, sadly, I won't get to take the benefit of it, my team will get it, but the county will save it overall, even if I don't get to use it to make our audit job better, it's still good for the county overall, so.
Thank you, Rob.
Absolutely. So then next up is about Navex. If you're not familiar with Navex, that's our tool that we use for collecting like hotline information. So it's kind of right now divided into two sections. We have a section for internal audit where people can report fraud, waste, and abuse, and this is only open to county employees at the moment. And then we also have a section for employee relations, which is for people to report employee relations issues, and that's open, again, only to county employees. So one of the things, we're sort of doing two things in Navex right now. We're hoping to go live with the data privacy piece either in April or May. That's already been budgeted, that's already been paid for, that's already taken care of. But the data privacy piece basically is something that our attorneys wanted us to put in there, and it kind of talks about how when you go to report this, here's kind of what it is that we're gonna do with your data, essentially, right? If you go in and you report that I think so-and-so is committing fraud, waste, or abuse, it goes in there and it kind of, lets them know, like, here's what we're doing with that information. It's a couple pages. It's important that our attorneys thought it was important for us to put it in there. It doesn't cost anything like over time. It's just sort of this upfront. It's like a couple $1,000 IT's paying for it. But that's taken up a lot of my time because I've had to sit down and talk with Navex and figure out like some of the specifics around it and all that kind of stuff. And then lastly is the third-party reporting piece that's taken a lot more of my time. So in the wake of our old county manager, kind of, you all kind of know, I don't think I need to say what happened. In the wake of that, we wanted the county commissioners wanted to introduce this program called Let's Talk, where residents could kind of bring forth concerns that they were seeing, right? And I think Let's Talk has kind of become this catch-all where a lot of different things kind of get funneled into it. So what we wanted to do is kind of formalize the fraud, waste, and abuse thing. So if a county resident wants to just sort of complain that services are bad, that's not really fraud, waste, and abuse, right? I don't really need to be seeing all of the complaints about FCC, for example, right? And then the number of people that get these the number of people that get these emails is incredibly high. So if someone is reporting fraud, waste, and abuse, that a lot of people see, right? And we kind of want to limit the number of people to see it to only those who kind of have confidentiality baked into their jobs, like internal audit or legal counsel. So what we're trying to do is add a piece where basically when you go to the Let's Talk forum, it kind of prompts you and says, hey, are you trying to report fraud, waste, and abuse, or you just kind of want to let us know what's going on? And if they say they want to report fraud, waste, and abuse, it'll redirect them to this Navex page, and then it'll get dumped into our regular Navex platform, the same as an employee reporting fraud, waste, and abuse. So that's kind of what we're moving towards. It's been taking a lot of my time working on this to make sure we really get all the details right. I've been spending a lot of time with our IT person, named Sherry. She's the best. I love her. But it's been a lot of my time going through and meetings and reviewing spreadsheets and just all these other kind of things, right? So that's taken up a lot of my time, but hopefully going forward, it'll help save my time because I won't get all these Let's Talk emails that I have to read through and make sure there's nothing in there about fraud, waste, or abuse. The reason that I felt comfortable doing this is that in my time working here, not quite a year, but coming up on a year, I've not had a single complaint of fraud, waste, or abuse that came through Let's Talk. I had one that kind of looked like it might be. And when I contacted the resident, they were actually just said that their neighbor stole something from them. And I was like, well, you can call the sheriff's office. So that's kind of where we're moving as far as the Navex piece goes, right? So this has been taking up a lot of my time. It's valuable stuff. I'm glad I'm doing it. This has kind of been neglected for some time here.
I was just about to say, it's been an ongoing conversation, and it's one that I think, because it fell into the internal audit department, it was always the ongoing conversation that maybe it didn't belong there. But if you're doing the work to separate it and make sure that it's in the right place and it funnels correctly, then you're only dealing with what actually belongs.
Right, and that's what we're shooting for. And that's why I haven't brought any things from Let's Talk to this group, because there haven't been anything that have been fraud, waste, and abuse in the
I'm happy that there's not.
Finally, right, yeah.
And I'm happy with your decisions that you make. I will put into perspective that a lot of times, close to over 90% of the time that fraud is identified is because somebody made mention of something through one of these devices.
Yes.
So it's really important.
Yes, I'm glad we have them for sure. I think I don't have there's this ACFE report to the nations. I need to look at the most recent one because I actually have a presentation coming up in May about that. But in that presentation, they always talk about what percentage of fraud is uncovered through tips, and it's overwhelming. It's always over 50%. Tips are really mostly how you uncover fraud. That's just kind of how it's always been, probably how it always will be. With data analytics, auditors are getting better at detecting fraud, but it's still overwhelming. lead tips. So yeah, I'm glad we have this, but I think this will make it even better. So that's where I'm at on the software piece. Any questions before I move on to the next section?
Just,
Yes.
I guess for this dinosaur, when you talk about audit software, is this
Yeah.
solely for internal audit, or can it interface to help you with the external audit?
So I'm not touching, I'm not involved in the external audit piece at
Okay,
all.
but so it was, when you're talking about audit software, it really does not interface, or is,
Correct, it's
Okay,
just for
gotcha.
managing my work papers, yeah.
Gotcha.
So when we, for example, when we go to do a quality assurance review, a QAR, we'll get them limited access to the software so that they can look at kind of what projects we've done and that sort of thing, right? It's sort of the repository for the work that we do. And right now that repository is Diligent, and it'll move to this other software, hopefully. That's the goal.
Does that software include areas for documenting your internal control understanding, or is it just for the audit completion piece when you're performing audit?
So that's really what it, like, depends on the individual software and how much we're willing to pay. A lot of them separate out that kind of internal control piece in like a separate module. Diligent separates it out, so we don't even have that in Diligent despite all we're paying for it. But other softwares do have that kind of functionality, but some of them it's extra, some of them it lives in this. It just kind of depends on the individual software. So the ones that I've talked to, I believe Teammate only does not have that internal control piece at all, as far as I understand, but I haven't done the demo with them yet. I've just been in like initial conversations. Audit Board has it, but only if you get the kind of premium version of the software, which will save us money still, but not a lot of money. It'll be only a few thousand instead of tens of thousands. So it kind of depends on what we decide to go with. But yes, I think that's one of those things that it's difficult, because I want to make sure that whatever knowledge of internal controls that I have, and we'll talk about risk assessment in just a couple slides actually, I want to make sure that that doesn't go away, right? If I win the lottery tomorrow, or I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I want to make sure whoever jumps into my seat afterwards is capable of picking up where I left off, because I felt like there was no continuity between the former permanent director and myself, right? There just, nothing was really documented very well. I couldn't really find any of his notes about his risk assessment or anything like that. So I want to make sure that I keep that continuity going. So I'm using a Teams channel where I kind of document all my stuff. So as of right now, it's all living in this Teams channel that whoever comes into internal audit will get access to. So there'll at least be something, even if it's not formalized in the software.
I appreciate it, and I'd like to follow along with you on your logic pattern on how you arrive, because that's one of the first steps in arriving to the risk assessment and arriving to your audit.
Right, because without a good risk assessment, you're just kind of shooting darts at a dartboard, right? And there are going to be some risks that are always high, right? We know that P cards are always going to carry a lot of inherent risk just because it's basically cash, right? But without doing a good risk assessment, you are just kind of shooting darts at a board. No, that's not the approach that. So speaking of the risk assessment plan, historically at the county, the way it's been done from the notes that I can find, which are very few and far between, it's primarily just been an interview-only approach, right? This does shorten the time frame that it takes considerably, because all you're doing is interviewing people and then basically compiling all the notes from those interviews, right? And that's what I did for my first risk assessment here. But I think it's important to develop a risk universe that gives you way more data points, but it takes a much larger time investment. So my approach that I would like to move towards is a risk universe while also doing these interviews. I think I was sort of hoping at our last meeting that I'd be able to hire some people this fiscal year, so that way I could work on that risk universe with our new auditors. I have not been in this initial round of hiring, so I'm guessing I'll probably get my positions on July 1. That's kind of based on some conversations that I had, I don't think anything's officially been decided, but I think that's kind of the direction it's leaning as of right now, fingers crossed. So what I'm hoping for, kind of what I would like to do is, my proposed approach is to finish the P card audit that I'm working on right now. I would then like to do a vehicles audit. I think that's one of the high risk areas I talked about in our last meeting that was in my initial risk assessment. I think it only got more risky post-Helene. Then while we're doing the vehicles audit, I think that should take us through the end of this year and into next year. We'll be able to hire those new auditors. I can sort of get them starting trained on what the audit process looks like, at least the field work and reporting piece. They won't be involved in the planning of it because I'll start it before they get here. But then they can help finish out that audit, and then the fully staffed, we can kind of tackle creating a risk universe for the county. That would probably take a considerable amount of time, but I think once you've done it the first time, it makes it a lot easier to maintain it going forward, right? Updating a risk universe takes like 1/10 of the time it's creating. right? And then from there, we'll develop a new audit plan and bring that back to the audit committee. So I want to make sure that, you know, you all are comfortable with this approach. Technically, the way that the IA standards in our charter is written, I've proposed an audit plan and you all have approved it. So this you all don't actually need to approve. You're happy to let you hold a vote on it and approve this formally if you'd like to. But the way that it's written, I actually don't need a vote on this. I just wanted to get you all's opinion before I kind of move forward.
Can you help me better understand or remind me, the vehicle audit? What part were you specifically concerned about vehicles? Was it that they're missing or?
Yeah, so I sort of had three big buckets that I was concerned about with vehicles. The first one is, do we actually have all of the vehicles? I've asked a couple people a couple times when the last time we did a full vehicle inventory count was, and no one could really give me a clear answer on the last time we did one. So I want to make sure, first and foremost, as part of that audit, we'd be doing a full, me or the other auditors would be putting eyes on every single county vehicle, of which there are, you know, off the top of your head, it's over 1,000. Yeah, there's a lot of vehicles.
1,000 vehicles? I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. We do physical inventories every year where we send out sheets to departments to do the physical inventory themselves.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean we have everything that we say we have. Also, the asset list doesn't always match the inventory list because the threshold might not be met in some instances. Although vehicles, we are supposed to capitalize them regardless of the price. So we might be able to work together a little bit on this.
Yes, and I definitely would be working with finance a lot on this project. Yeah. I meant I don't think anyone from finance has, and this isn't a criticism of finance at all for the record, this would be a huge undertaking. I don't think anyone from finance has physically gone and put eyes on every single vehicle, right? And I'm not saying that has to be done regularly, but it's something that from what I can tell, no one's ever really done. So that's something that I want to make sure that we do, to just make sure that every single vehicle that we say we have, we actually can prove that we have it, right? That we're not just sending out a list to a department and someone in the department is saying yes, because we don't know if that person in the department has actually put eyes on it themselves. We're just kind of trusting that they are, right? As an auditor, you know, the old phrase is trust but verify. I want to kind of be the verification.
You might be able to narrow that down to by department. Maybe there might be more risky departments than others, so you're not having to go to put your eyes on every single one, but kind of identify.
Yeah, I think it'll depend on the total number of vehicles. I don't know the number off the top of my head, and that's something I'd figure out during planning. My goal would be to do all of them, but if that's not feasible, then it's obviously not something I end up doing.
So at the end of the day, that would mean that there's just too many vehicles on the books. I'm not exactly sure why that would be too high of a.
It's difficult because it's not like you can just go to a parking lot and match up vehicles. We got a lot of people that take home vehicles. So
Oh, and the sheriff's department.
Yeah, but the sheriff's department is always driving them around. That would be a lot of coordination with all the sheriff's departments. So it's a big undertaking, but I think it's an important one, right?
Well, at least to have a baseline.
Yes,
I mean,
right.
all inventory starts with a baseline. And then you don't have to do a full inventory every 3 months or every 6 months. But you have to at least have a baseline and know where you start in a process of if they're sold or purchased or.
Yeah, and I think especially as we move towards leased vehicles, I think this is a good time for that because there are gonna be a lot of vehicles that are gonna be dropping off our books as we move leased vehicle on. So doing this big account once, I think is super valuable.
Yeah.
So that's the first piece of it. The second piece of it, we talked about take homes a little bit. I have some concerns about take home vehicles. I'm not sure if we're always in compliance with our policy. Finance sort of asks the department to make sure every year the department director has to go in and verify like, yep, these are the take home vehicles. I certify that these people who have take home vehicles are in compliance with the vehicle policy. And that's kind of where we end it, which as far as finance is concerned, I think that's a good internal control to do. But I don't know if we can always I don't know if that's good enough for what I want to see as far as like, okay, are we actually sure that all these people are in compliance, right? Because department directors might, I'm not saying this is happening, but there's a concern that department directors might sort of treat take-home vehicles as kind of like well, I can't really give you a bonus this year, but what I can do is give you a car that you can take home and drive so you don't have to put miles on your car, right? Or maybe you drive an old car and so I'm gonna give you this new car and you can drive this new car, right? So I wanna make sure that we're in compliance with our piece as far as take-home vehicles, and then the last piece of it is sort of personal use of vehicles. Since one of the things that our sustainability office actually did a few years ago, was put tracking in all of the non-sheriff's office vehicles. So we have lifetime real tracking of all the vehicles in the county, which means I can go in and do some data analytics and try and figure out if any of them are being taken out of Buncombe County, if we have a vehicle that's not a take-home vehicle going to someone's home address, that sort of thing, right? Lots and lots of data in there, like a crazy amount. We're talking like terabytes of data available to kind of mine for this, because it's like if someone's driving this vehicle, it sort of tracks it, and okay, right now it's driving 30 miles per hour westward on Patton Avenue, and then it goes to 35 miles an hour, and then it turns south on this road, and whatever it is, right? It's very thorough, the data that we have, which means if someone is using it for personal use, we should be able to figure that out. So that's kind of the three big pieces that I wanted to in a vehicles audit. And that's a big undertaking, but I think it's an important piece for us to do because there's so much risk when it comes to vehicles. And then the other thing that I think that kind of complicates this project a little bit, that we can kind of get into once the audit starts, assuming we're comfortable with me moving forward with the vehicles audit, is that the way that our policies work as far as kind of intermingling with the sheriff's office, they are allowed to write their own policies. So we're kind of working with two different sets of standards, right? The sheriff's office has their rules for sheriff's office vehicles, and then the rest of the county has their rules for the rest of the county. So making sure that I understand the difference between those two things, and the whole vehicle count will absolutely be there, but I can't really verify if a sheriff's office person is using their vehicle for personal use because they opted out of all the tracking that sustainability is doing for the rest of the county, if that kind of makes sense. So vehicles is a huge risk. I have to ask Sheriff Miller. I'm not sure. That decision was made before I even came on board, so I don't know.
Why?
Well, I do know they have that usage where they can track all their cars. You can go, have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
Where you can look and see where they are, maybe.
I think that's more in real time, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the one for the county is sort of captures all the time and like records it historically. Yeah.
Overall, it sounds like you're worried that there is a policy, but it's not functioning. Is that what I'm?
I think that's fair to say.
And
that's my concern. I don't know if it's happening, and that's why I want to do the audits, that way we can find out.
And while that may be true, I'm glad that there is at least a policy, and I think that on your list of priorities here, I think moving the complete risk universe is a higher priority. And that you can outline a host of areas where there aren't even policies in place that we should proactively address. And then we can start to prioritize those policies that are in place that we want to see, are they functioning? And I think when you start to prioritize it, the vehicle audit probably wouldn't be, at the top of that list in terms of ones. But I do think it's a good course of action to kind of go use the software and use it. So I understand not to, belittle your time. I think it is always worthwhile to, you can get some valuable information from going through that process. But I think from kind of putting it in order, the complete risk assessment, the risk universe that you described would be higher up.
Yeah, and I think in a vacuum, I would probably agree with that. I think it's more a matter of practicality. I think without having a full audit shop, doing a complete risk universe would be, if not impossible, I mean, it would take triple the time, right? And I think that's kind of the main reason for it, is it allows, I could start on it, but I think with having a full staff working on that from the start, I think it would be a much more valuable exercise. I also don't want to start it without hiring new auditors, because I think it gives those auditors ownership, right? Those auditors come in and they helped develop this risk universe, they're going to feel much more ownership over it. Yeah. Whereas if they come in and it's a third done, half done, 25% done, whatever it is, they're not going to feel as much ownership over that portion of it. So I think in a vacuum, I would agree with you. And I think if I was already fully staffed, I probably would be starting with the risk universe. It's the fact that we don't have our full staff of auditors yet that I kind of wanted to go in this order. But if the audit committee would rather me start with the risk universe, I am super comfortable doing that, and I'm fine either way. This is why I wanted to bring it to the group for discussion.
We just write down the third music. One was that they're all there, completeness. Another one was that they are now being used
for personal. And the last one is, are we complying with our rules around take-home? So for everyone that has a take-home vehicle, is that someone who, based on our policy, should have a take-home vehicle? And if not, is it an issue that we've been giving them out? Is it an issue? Basically, in other words, if let's say, for example, I go in and we find 20 people that have a take-home vehicle that based on our policy shouldn't. Does the county agree that those people should have a vehicle? And if that's the case, then the policy needs to be updated to bring it in line with our practice, right? And if they agree, well, actually they shouldn't have a take-home vehicle, this was an oversight, then we can take away those take-home vehicles and the county can use those vehicles for something else or sell them and save some money, essentially.
Is the county doing any sort of IRS reporting for the community?
That's something that I would be asking about during the vehicles audit, I hope so, but Melissa can probably answer that better than I could.
You know that we had looked at IRS and compliance with take-home.
Right, yes, so it's a collaboration between our office, HR, and really the employee. And so we include vehicle benefits as a taxable fringe benefit. We indicate to them the value of the usage of that vehicle, and then it's kind of based on them. We give them the W-2 and they can communicate from there. But we do give them calculation of components, but we have had a parallel conversation, so I think that Rob's been interested in as well, so we can clean some things up too.
Yeah, because that's a risk.
Right.
Well, and I can just say in support of what you're proposing, we have found that vehicles, there's a lot there, and I think,
Yeah. I mean, our state auditor got busted, right, for
Yeah.
personal use of her own vehicle, that it's clearly a big risk.
It's a risk, and-
From the top to the bottom, right?
and I think it's critical just from a baseline perspective to have an overview like you're proposing of the vehicles. So, and then again, if people are being given cars that the county doesn't need to be funding, or if there's an excess amount out there, then that's another opportunity for dollars to be gained back. So I think your proposal makes sense, and I think, I know it doesn't require a vote, but I'd like to offer my support to the idea and the concept that you've presented.
I appreciate that, yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we went through this back years ago, we cut our fleet down 2/3 was gone because we were better off with IRS and all paying mileage. You know, we said we had people driving cars, collectors and different ones that didn't even need them, but we had.
Yeah, well, I think there is there's so many facets to it as well, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the examples that comes to mind, and we're gonna go into the weeds on this, but one of the things that comes to mind is our social workers, right? A lot of our social workers drive their personal vehicles, right? Because there's not always a vehicle available for them to take. And our social workers, as you all know, are relatively one of the lowest paid positions in the county, right?
And
so
they drive all over.
And they drive all over, and so their cars oftentimes have a lot of miles on them. Is this what's safest for the, you know? So that's something that I would kind of want to try and look at as well, is like, are we really utilizing are we utilizing our fleet appropriately? Or do we have some departments that have 20 vehicles, but they only need 5, and we have some departments that have 5 and need 20, right? That's kind of something that I was hoping to kind of dig into a little bit as well, but I know that that's, a lot of people get protective of their vehicles in their departments, so I know that this will probably be potentially a contentious audit, especially if I'm saying, you know, we have 20 people who have take-homes that don't need them. Those 20 people are probably not gonna be happy with me, I imagine. So that's something that I need to, you know, I wanna make sure before we start this audit, I need to, you know, obviously we need the audit committee on board for this, because if there is pushback, then I can go and say, well, hey, the audit committee is okay with us doing this audit, they think it's valuable, et cetera.
I think it's valuable and critical.
I really like the way
We
you
have a liability.
try to add on a few more things while you're doing it, such as the utilization, and there might be a few other things that you can help out with, maybe it might be, you know, adding more asset tags to these things.
Yeah, and I can always ask Sheriff Miller
assessing
during that
the-
project, like, hey, why aren't you opted into this? Is this something that we could get you to opt into, so that way we have that information? You know, it's a little bit, personal use of sheriff's vehicles, almost impossible to figure out, because they do go home every night, right?
Yeah.
They take their vehicles when they need to, you know?
Right.
I have a sheriff's office with a canine unit that lives right around the corner from my house, right? Obviously that car needs to come home, or else the dog has to sleep in the
Right.
sheriff's office, you know, so it's not ideal there. Were you gonna say one more thing?
So yeah, a couple of factors. When the county was doing analysis to go into the lease program, we had collected a lot of the data. And for sheriffs and non-sheriff vehicles. So I think that will be a great starting point to also compare to the other data to make sure that we see all different data sources, but that'll kind of help jumpstart. We also have that new fleet manager.
Yes, we do have
Which
now
will
a fleet
be
manager on board, which
A great person to help have more oversight and stuff and to kind of help be the watchdog and carry out more compliance aspects. And we've had someone that was really focused on that overall.
I would agree. Yeah, the new fleet manager I think is a good position, and I'm hoping that when we start this project, if I sit down with the fleet manager, they can sort of, they probably have some things that are frustrating them as well that we can look into during that process to hopefully add some value. So, so if you all are comfortable with that approach, and it kind of seems like the consensus is largely yes, then this is what I'll move forward with.
Yeah.
It'll probably take me some time to finish this P-card audit still. There's a lot of stuff going on in P-cards, as you can imagine. And like I said, my attention has been pulled in a bunch of different directions. But that's all I have for this piece of it. So next I want to give an update on the special project that
One more question.
Yes.
Is the county self-insured for all vehicle liability?
Yes, with the one asterisk being, I believe we purchased supplemental insurance on the ambulances specifically because they're like $500,000. That's difficult to replace if one of those gets into an accident and they're always being driven. So I think that's the only ones that we have supplemental insurance on, but that would be a better question for Kelly, who unfortunately was not able to.
So I was thinking that you might be able to coordinate a little bit with them because like miles driven per wreck or, cost. Just think something that might tie into that vehicle's audit, that it is important as far as assessing risk.
Yes, it is. It
Because
is.
you've got these vehicles on the road.
So I want to give an update about a special project. This is the report that I sent you all March 24th, I believe it was. Yeah, it's right on my slide. Yes, March 24th. So this was a project that received a complaint in August of 2024 before Helene. We completed all of our field work on this project before Helene hit. Action was taken by county management, sort of partially related to our project. But we never actually got around to issuing the audit report because the storm hit and then I've been busy with other things. So we were able to sort of wrap up the audit, get all of my field work, like papers completed and documented and cross-referenced and approved and all that kind of stuff, and then drafted a report, which I have included in the materials. I think I have hard copies for anybody who needs one. We had a total of 4 recommendations. 3 of them were P-card related that I hopefully will actually, these are things that probably would have came up during the P-card audit if not here. And then the last one is a recommendation to kind of re-look at one of our policies, specifically the conflict of interest policy. So there's 4 recommendations on this special project. I sent the report. Were there any questions on the report? I know, Martha, you had sent me a question about it, which I think I answered for you. Are there any other questions that anyone have about this? That was a very, very fun project to first come on with the county for sure. Yes, yes.
And we like our P-cards.
Yes, we do like our P-cards. So with that, if there's no questions on the special project, that is all I actually had. Those are actually 2 agenda items. I should put them all in one presentation because I figured it'd be easier that way. Any questions for internal audit at all about the update, about special project, anything for me?
I have just a general question, and maybe it's, I don't want to start too much of a discussion, but just in general, is it more concerning when there's a policy not in place or when it's not functioning correctly? And I can see that, both being concerning, but I just want you to kind of, as you look at your recommendations and you're looking at it, put them into those categories. And then we can kind of put more emphasis on those.
I think I guess a sort of 2-part answer to that question. The first part is it's more concerning than there's no policy, right? But no policy is a lot easier to fix than a broken policy. So I think that's kind of, it's difficult for me because it's sort of, if I were to go, let's say for example, there's an area that I was very passionate about, maybe grants, right? I don't think we have a specific policy surrounding grants. And I was to go in and do a grants audit. Really, I think my primary thing that I would be recommending in that audit is, hey, you really need to get a grants audit, right? Sort of like when they did the cash controls audit and the primary recommendation was, hey, you really need a cash handling policy, right? They spent a lot of time on that audit. When in my mind, I feel like you could have stopped as soon as you saw that there was no cash handling policy and said, hey, develop a cash handling policy and then we'll come back and we'll actually do the audit work that we want to do, right? Because what are you testing against if there's no cash handling policy? You're just testing against best practices. And if I go in and say, well, hey, the best practice is that you need to have 2 people count the cash and it's at a park where only 1 park ranger is working at a time, thanks for the best practice. What can you give me something else to work with, right? So I think that, and there weren't any recommendations like that out of that policy, out of that audit, because again, it was primarily just to develop a policy, right? So the reason that I want to focus my audit work on broken policies is because it's easy for me to just walk over to Mason's office and say, hey, we need a grants policy. You guys should probably work on that. It's completely different if I know that the vehicles policy is kind of held together with duct tape. It's a lot harder to go in and like make specific recommendations on how to fix it without doing a whole audit, if that kind of makes sense. I think that's why I tend to focus my efforts in terms of audits on that. Whereas like, I feel like I'm regularly having conversations with folks, both in HR and in finance about like, hey, we don't have a policy around this. It's something we should probably think about. The problem is it takes a lot of time and effort to draft these policies, which is why maybe they, don't get drafted as often as we would like. So
those are gaps that even though we're not able to address it because of time or benefit, time and effort, that we should still have on a list in front of us so it doesn't escape us and we need to keep on revisiting the list and reprioritizing. And often, one thing that gets lost is often when fraud, waste, and abuse does happen and there's not a policy in place, often the tables can be reversed and the people who were in charge of putting a policy in place can be held liable for a tort because you should have had a policy that protected cash from being stolen.
Yeah.
That's an example of how, these policies also help protect the people in charge.
absolutely, I completely agree. And same with the commissioners too, right? Like, because the commissioners approve a lot of these policies, this is something that could end up, coming all the way up to the commissioner level if we have something happens and it's due to a lack of policy, so. I appreciate the question, though. So I had one call, this was back when I was in higher ed, I had a colleague who, I forget what university they were at, but I remember they took this very novel approach where they were going to just every single month, they were gonna go into a department, they were gonna have a standard list of questions for them about all of their policies and procedures and all this kind of stuff. And they weren't actually gonna do any controls testing, it was just, do you have these in place, yes or no? And if the answer was no, they would issue this big audit report that would say, here's all the things that you need to put in place. And then we're gonna come back in 6 months and do it again. And if you still don't have the policies, again, we're gonna keep reporting out to the board over and over again until you finally draft these, right? I thought that was a little aggressive, maybe. But I mean, they issued, I think in that first 18 months that they did this little experiment, I think they issued something like 150 audit reports. And I'm like, I don't think you all would have the time to read 150 audit reports in a year and a half, but a lot of them were the same. Like, they don't have any policies in place. They really need to develop policies. So that was an interesting experiment, but something that I don't, it's not a wrong approach. It was just, that's sort of a novel approach that I've never seen taken before. So
I think there is at one point in time that you can take that and then start to identify, are there complementary controls or mitigating controls that kind of may take place, or maybe another group of controls in combination.
Yeah.
And so we can identify, from a prioritize which ones are the most high risky from a financial statement.
Right, once you take into account the compensating controls, how high is the risk factor?
Or from a compliance.
Yeah.
Well, having worked on both sides of the equation as external auditor and internal auditor and as a department manager, time is sometimes it's like you're so busy plugging your fingers in the hole in the dike, you don't have a chance to do a repair policy, So I have a lot more compassion, and I figure, we're here just for oversight and reference. I would trust your judgment on this and how to proceed and how to help departments develop policies.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think when it comes to developing policies, that's one of those, I very much like to take the approach of just telling them that they should have one, rather than doing a formal audit. I think it's a little bit little bit more friendly, perhaps. I don't want to be like a confrontational kind of audit director. I think I want people to work collaboratively with me. And I think so far I've hopefully been able to strike that balance. I've worked with your team a lot. Hopefully you all feel that way. But that's kind of what I shoot for, right? And I think if I go in and do an audit and just issue a report that says you don't have a policy, you need to make one high risk and then end there, I'm not sure how much value I'm really adding for that department. So. Any other questions for internal audit before we move on to the next agenda item?
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
All righty, so now we move to the rest of the year meeting schedule. Looking at our quarterly calendar, y'all folks get your calendar out. If we're going to continue with the first or second Tuesday of the month, we're looking at July the 1st and July the 8th.
I am on annual leave that week of July 1,
Okay.
so my preference would be the 8th in that case.
Yeah, and a lot of times we'll cancel our meeting that week of July 4th. I'm trying to look for the meeting schedule for us
Yeah,
that
we
week as
did,
well.
we will.
Yeah, we
Yeah, we-
traditionally do.
I hate to be the pain in this, but I'm not available either the 1st or the 8th. So I don't know if in July we could do the 15th.
I can do the 15th for sure.
Yeah, 15.
Okay, if we go to 15th, that's all right with me.
Once we have all these dates, I'll communicate these out to the rest.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if we move to October, the first Tuesday is October the 7th.
October the 7th.
We'll be here anyway.
Yep, 7th works for me. if that's right.
Okay.
All right.
All right, then we get to the end of the year, December the 2nd or December the 9th. I wouldn't recommend any closer, we're getting into Christmas.
Yeah.
But I think, looking at what day Thanksgiving is, I think that would be the 27th. So that would be the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, just for everyone.
December 2nd, yeah,
December 2nd, okay?
Okay.
All
because
right.
we don't have the 3rd, we don't have,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the 2nd.
Just depends.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the committee chair assignment that Mr. Christie, because we didn't have a meeting in December, December is when we choose the next chair. And because we didn't have a meeting, that sort of defaulted into Mr. Christie. Thank you for explaining this to me.
Yes.
So technically, Mr. Christie is still the chair. So we have an option of letting Mr. Christie continue on until December, or selecting a new chair today, which will lock in the 1-year term, which would mean we'd have to select the next chair in April of 26. So what is the pleasure, to let Mr. Christie continue, or?
Yeah, that's what I would say,
That's what
let him finish the.
Okay,
I talked to him briefly about this, and he's comfortable
Yeah.
continuing if the committee's comfortable.
all right.
I was gonna ask, are we volunteering him because he's not here?
No, I did chat with him first.
We tried to politely ask
Yeah.
Instead of just blowing him out of the water.
Okay,
Yeah,
So I guess.
That's what you get for missing the meeting.
Yeah.
Right? You get all the homework
Yeah,
assigned.
yeah. So I guess to make this official, I would entertain a motion to.
so move.
Second.
All righty, moving a second, anybody, and I'll say acclamation unless anybody opposed. Silence, okay, so Mr. Chrissy, you have got it for the rest of the year. Okay, do we have any members of the public that want to make a comment?
They're
Okay.
missing this fabulous
Oh,
internal
man,
audit
oh,
meeting.
man.
The unmitigated golf.
We do have one connected viewer though watching online.
Oh,
Okay, well,
fantastic.
welcome
That's
viewer,
awesome.
at this point, if you'd like to chat or make a comment,
They're just watching, they're
Just
not
watching.
connected to the phone bridge.
Oh, which is fine, so then I guess in that case, there's no public comment. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All right, off to the next one.
I just really quick, Al made the motion, Amanda seconded, right?